Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Mac Chuck Show with your co-hosts, Chuck Hill and Mac McKenzie. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the show. Mac, how you doing?
All right.
Doing all right tonight? Got your Canes hat on. That's pretty cool.
Yep.
All right. Well, tonight's show is brought to you by Alfresco Productions' presentation of Christmas in Concert this week. And it's going to be starring Bonnie Bramlett from Granite City. And some of you may know her from Roseanne or from her illustrious jazz career, Delaney and Bonnie. And I'll be in there as well as my daughter Shelby. And we do want to give them recognition. So this week on Friday and Saturday at 7 p.m. at Alfresco Productions at 2041 Delmar Avenue, you'll be able to catch the show. And just to give you a sneak peek of what you're going to be seeing, here you go. Again, a very special thank you to Alfresco Productions for sponsoring the show this evening. And if you're interested in sponsoring the show, reach out to Mac or myself, and we'll be happy to get you the details on that.
Would that be called peddling your wares?
Peddling our wares?
Your wares, not me. It wasn't my mug on the picture.
Maybe just a shameless plug.
Okay, fair enough. You're peddling your wares.
Hey, you know what? I'm always happy to help support local talent and local shows. So, kind of like our show. I like to promote our show also.
Can we make a cool commercial?
We can make a cool commercial.
All
well,
right.
I don't know. I guess you got to be cool to make a cool commercial. So, can we make a cool commercial?
Okay, we'll fake it.
Well, hey, you know what? Fake it till you make it, right?
All right. Welcome, everybody. Again, sorry we were not here last week. We had some personal things to attend to. But I believe, sir, this is your week for the random thought. Why don't you slap it on us?
It is. So this has the tendency or the opportunity to go some way or another. So my random thought this week, it could go up, it could go down. You never know. So I was just kind of thinking this week, obviously sometimes we, ponder the things in life that make life interesting or make life kind of what it is. But my question to myself was, why do we do what we do? And while that seems like a pretty vague question, it's actually like, why do we do the things that we do? Like, why do we work where we work? Why do we, live where we live? Why do we, spend the money that we spend? Why do we save the money that we spend? Like, what is really like the ultimate goal of what we do? I mean, Some people want to live in really huge houses, but why is that? Like, do you need a big house? No one needs a big house. I mean, even if you have a bigger family, I guess, sure. But for me, it's just kind of like, why do we make the decisions that we make? Like, what drives that? And for me, I've really had to kind of like start asking myself that question. Why do I do what I do? Why do I do the photography? And sometimes I think, well, it's because of the money. And then I'm like, well, there are things I can do without though, you know? So do I really need all the money and things like that? There are things I don't need to do. Like I don't need to eat, to eat out. I can eat in the house. I don't need to buy my lunch. I can always take lunch with me. So which would drastically, and I mean drastically, decrease my need, for, as much money, you know. So that was kind of my random thought. And then, I do have some friends of mine that, free will. Okay, here's a great example. Like, why do we do stupid crap? Okay, I know, right?
Kind of going off on a tangent there, Chief.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I thought it was just kind of a random thought,
So your random thoughts turning into a random novel.
Yeah. So anyway, that's my random thought for the week. Is why do we do what we do, and do we really? Again, I was about to mention, free will comes into a question there. There are some people who believe we have free will, and other people who believe that everything is already preordained and everything is already set in motion, and nothing we do changes that. We don't have free will. We're just a bunch of like pre-programmed robots running around on the planet, and so I guess that's kind of what it was. Do we do things because we actually have free will, or do we do things because we're pre-programmed to do everything?
I think a lot of it personally, and kind of piggybacking off of Wendy's comment there, is a lot of people do that stuff for societal acceptance. In our society now, the bigger the better. The more you're appear to be societally up the ladder, people feel the more accepted you'll be, and 9 times out of 10 they usually are. I mean, how many people, even when we were kids, are usually looking down on the people that are more viewed as having less than the people who don't.
The peasants.
But, well, I wasn't going to say peasants, but people. I mean, people equate. Okay, for lack of a better word, your peasantry comment with minimalist people that don't need that but are comfortable living within their means.
Yeah.
I mean, you really have to view it that way in that prism.
Yeah, so I wonder what the key is there, though. Like, you have the people that, like you said, minimalist. I think that's a great word. People that just get by with, what they have, and they don't worry about the biggest TV or any TV at all. They're more, they just want a roof over their head, food in their mouth, and clothes on their body, and shoes on their feet.
I mean, our grandparents are great examples of that. Growing up in the Depression era, like they did, they didn't need a lot, and they saved tons.
Yeah, I don't know. Grandpa Bob sure was interested in knowing how much money people made. Oh, for those of you who don't know, every time
totally different era. People talked about that stuff.
Oh yeah, every time I would go over to Mac's grandpa's house, like within 2 minutes, 5 minutes, maybe 10.
Where do you work and how much do you make?
Where do you work and what are you making over there, Chuck?
Yep.
I loved your grandpa though, man. He was a good dude.
Mm-hmm.
Good dude. All right, so yeah, that's my random thought for the week.
And I'll post that on the page after the show. That way people can view it throughout the week and hopefully add their own thoughts and comments in on that. And like I said a couple weeks ago, we're going to start posting those random thoughts after the show on the Facebook page for people to partake in and share comments and back and forth commentary.
Yeah. And if you guys have thoughts on it, go ahead and post them in our comments tonight also. And if you have a quick thought, because if you're anything like me, thoughts come and go. They flee
quicker than they used to.
Yeah, no kidding. No kidding. When he says people that didn't have a lot growing up, let's post this up here. People that didn't have a lot growing up may grow up living like the Joneses for acceptance. Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, I can see that. By the way, Wendy, I love that picture. All right. Yeah, no, I can see that.
Is that another shameless plug there, Hill?
I wasn't promoting myself, but You know,
You don't have anything to do with taking that picture, would you?
no, nothing at all.
Uh-huh.
You know. So, all right. Well, there's your random thought. Let's get into it, Mac. What are we talking about tonight?
Well, let's start off first with Thanksgiving oranges. those two origins and maybe misconceptions. Maybe it's not all what we were taught in school.
Yeah.
Maybe it wasn't people bringing picnic tables to Indians bringing picnic tables and corn and everything else to the settlers.
And by Indians, I assume you mean Native Americans.
Oh, will you shut up? Gee whiz, man.
Why don't you just call them engines while you're at it?
Anywho.
So, you go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, that's kind of the first topic. Then we'll expand into kind of the next one, and we'll mention that before we segue, as they say in the biz.
The segue. So, it's interesting, that you mentioned that about Thanksgiving and what we were taught in school versus, facts. And it's really interesting because history is changing on us anyway. And I'm sure we'll dive into this a little bit later on, but it's almost like the history that we learned, even from grade school to high school, really kind of changed.
Mm-hmm.
Grade school, we, draw the pictures of turkeys, using our hands or whatever. And, the cornucopia of food and things like that. And, so what was your impression of Thanksgiving growing up, Mac?
My impression was, since I learned everything I know from TV, my understanding of Thanksgiving as a kid was, just basically what they show on Charlie Brown Thanksgiving, family getting together, giving thanks, eating food, talking about pilgrims landing on Plymouth Rock, the Native Americans showing up, helping the settlers plant food after the first harsh winter, stuff like that. But that's a very, very, not to put it in that context, but a very topical, tip of the iceberg view of what really happened.
Mm-hmm. And that's kind of where I was at. It's just very whitewashed, very white. I mean, the Puritans and the early settlers and things like that, celebrating it with Native Americans. And for me, that's kind of how it's always been. And then obviously you grow older, and people teach you that Thanksgiving is a day that's set aside specifically to give thanks for everything. And then you have that progressed into November being like on social media every day posting a day that you're thankful. Although I will say I didn't notice much of that this year. On social media. And, I'm just curious if that has to do with the current, political climate or whatever. But, it was interesting how it all changed as we got older. And then even as we're the age that we are now, there's some people that, will not celebrate Thanksgiving because of the impression that it gives, towards, Native Americans and, things along that line. Have you changed your views at all over the last, I would say, 30 years over Thanksgiving, or?
In a whole, I'll say no. Learning as we do, as we age and get older, you learn more things. I don't know. I don't really question it because some of what we were taught was, like I said, tip of the iceberg stuff.
Right.
I'm not even going to try to pronounce the name of the tribe, but the New England tribe that kind of helped the Pilgrims and the Puritans set up everything. They did it what they felt, and I read this earlier, out of necessity because of the other tribes and the French settlers. So they felt like they had it was an uncomfortable alliance in the beginning with the what everybody knows as the Pilgrims, for help against the French and the other tribes. And I found that out, and I thought that was pretty interesting. kind of like the peace offering. But as America developed, there's more expansion, more land taken up that really shouldn't have been theirs in the first place, according to some people. There was also, moving these tribes out of their homelands for the settlers to expand their homesteads and things. So, as you learn that, you could take two schools of thought. That's absolutely horrible, or you could take the school of thought of to the conqueror go the spoils type thing. But I don't know. I try to tend to stay along the positive side, and thankful that they were there to help them survive the first few winters.
Yeah. And I want to say that Indian name was the Wampanoag tribe.
Yeah, like I said, I wasn't even going to try to pronounce that.
Yeah, and I may be
way off. It's like me. Yeah. That's why I didn't even try.
Yeah. So my heritage comes from the Blackfoot Indians, which is
mine comes from
easier
the
Choctaw. Choctaw?
Choctaw.
The Choctaw? Choctaw? What?
No, not the Chucktail. Choctaw.
Choctaws? What? Choctaw? I know. I'm hilarious. Just ask me. I'll tell you any day.
So, based upon that, it's again, you can take the information as you will, and become one of these people that says, I'm not going to celebrate Thanksgiving because of this. Were you there 500 years ago?
Yeah.
Probably not. But there's also tales, too, that the early Spanish settlers kind of celebrated a feast that resembled that as well. So, you could take many different angles, many different aspects of this. But, when it comes down to just use Thanksgiving as a day to get together with family and be thankful that, number one, you still can. Number two, you have the means to do so. Sometimes you just have to break things down to their simplest denominator and just be thankful.
Yeah, I'd be interested to know the differences between Canadian Thanksgiving and American Thanksgiving, because apparently Canadian Thanksgiving, I think, is in October.
Canadian bacon, eh?
Canadian bacon. That's probably like the official food of Canadian Thanksgiving.
Yeah, they don't have ham, eh? They got Canadian bacon, dude.
So I'm going to be honest. I haven't really given it a whole lot of thought about whether or not I was. It was never even a thought to me to not celebrate Thanksgiving. Because for me, it's really not a matter. It's almost like Christmas, and we'll talk about this in a future show. But it's almost like Christmas. Thanksgiving is a day that is set aside, to be with family and be thankful for your family, and to just reflect on what you've had.
Eat a lot of pie, undo the belt.
Eat a lot of pie, undo the belt. Watch a good football game.
Pass out on the couch.
But it just kind of means that you're thankful, and you take a day to reflect. And I say like Christmas because if you know the Bible, you know that Jesus was not born in December, and it wasn't snowing because it very rarely, if ever, snows in the Middle East, right? But Christmas, was probably, Jesus was born more probably in March, April, early spring, right around there. And Christmas is just kind of a day that, we set aside, as a Christian, you set it aside to, remember the birth of Christ. As an atheist or as an agnostic, you might, set it aside to, again, have time with family and things like that. So that's kind of the approach I've taken with Thanksgiving over the years, is just like, it's just a time to be together with family and friends, and, to give thanks. And it's funny because I was looking it up, and I want to say that, Thanksgiving, the first autumn harvest with the Wampanoag Indians, if that's how you pronounce it, Native Americans.
I think you're getting better.
Yeah, it was back in 1621. Was when the first autumn harvest, occurred, and I think it was 1739 when President Washington actually, declared the first Thanksgiving.
1739? He wasn't president then.
Who was it?
There was no president in 1739.
Hold on. I've got it here. No,
You
he
know-
wasn't the president in 1739. 1789.
Okay.
Yeah, 1789. Had my numbers transposed there. And even then, it was like the first Thursday, so it changed in 39, where it went to the last Thursday of the month. And so I mean, it's kind of nice that our country sets that day aside for that. But again, back then it took a whole different meaning than what it has now to a lot of people.
Right.
So, what's your favorite Thanksgiving food?
I'll say stuffing.
It's a great choice. I like stuffing. So I'd like to hear about you guys out there also. Let us know what Thanksgiving means to you, and let us know what your favorite foods were. Maybe let us know what you did this past Thanksgiving. And I think that my favorite food, I do like stuffing, and I like mashed taters. But I think the best mashed taters. I think my favorite food for Thanksgiving, not turkey. I do like turkey, but is some people call them funeral potatoes. Some people call them Texas taters. You ever had these?
Cheesy taters.
Yes. Oh my gosh. You take some cubed potatoes and some cream of mushroom or cream of chicken soup, mix in some sour cream, some cream cheese, and some corn chips or corn flakes, rather.
You know why they call them funeral potatoes, right?
Well, you're probably not wrong in that assumption. It definitely does not add years to your life. That's for sure. But yeah, no, that's my favorite right there. I like to play games.
You gotta take an extra shot or two after that.
Right. Unfortunately, this year I was pretty much laid up all day on Thanksgiving, as you know. Had some kind of bug that just kicked my ass for 2 or 3 days. But yeah, awesome. So yeah, that may be it on Thanksgiving.
That's it already?
I think so. Is Thanksgiving one of your favorite holidays, or what's your favorite holiday?
The season we are in.
The Christmas season? Now, does that have anything to do with your birthday?
It could be.
It's a possibility.
No, it's always had, well, until recently, but it's always had a magical feel, even as a kid.
Yeah. Did you notice, or let's talk about this for a few minutes while we got some time. As you got older and your kids are getting older and things like that, did you notice anything different the way you felt about Christmas, and what do you attribute to that, if so?
It's not as fun anymore, and I associate that with adulthood and the everyday stressors that come with it. I mean, it's a pretty easy answer for me.
Yeah. So the season doesn't necessarily change for you. It just kind of stays, like your thoughts on that change just throughout the year. They stay the same. It just never changes around the holiday season.
No, I always. I mean, the last couple of years have been rough just because of the climate we're in. But, I enjoy putting up the lights. I enjoy the tradition of it. I enjoy watching all the. Looking forward to the Christmas cartoons and all that stuff. I mean, it's something I've always done.
And then this year it's a little different, huh?
Well, no, the last couple of years have been different just because of all the garbage that's gone on.
Yeah.
I mean, it just doesn't have the same feel.
At one point, folks, maybe you can help us get our Christmas spirit back, because at one time, Christmas used to be my favorite time of year. It was just I just really loved it. And not just because of, my faith, but it kind of was that magical time. And I don't necessarily get that anymore. I like Christmas, I like the season. I like what comes along with it. But I don't get near as excited about it as I used to.
Even when our kids were younger, I mean, it had more of a magic feel to it because you were excited for them.
Yeah. Yeah. Hey, Fabe Dog, welcome to the show. He said, just got on Thanksgiving in Pearl Harbor. It's quite a mix-up tonight, huh? So Nikki says, it was hard for me when our youngest stopped believing in Santa. It took some of the magic away. And you know what? I think that there's some kind of truth to that. I think that when our kids stop believing in Santa Claus, then it does kind of takes a little bit of that away, because you kind of tend, I did anyway, tend to live vicariously, through my
Hmm.
kids at Christmas
Well,
time.
well, you get excited sitting there watching their excitement and the anticipation of what's in each package that they open. There's a
Right.
lot to be said for that.
Or the excitement to see Santa Claus. I mean, that was, while it was a pain in the ass for parents to stand in line waiting to see Santa Claus, it's cool to see your kids get excited about that,
My kids
you
never.
know?
They just kind of.
Yeah. Well, there's a certain age range for sure where kids are cool with Santa, and there's an age range where they are definitely not cool with Santa.
And when they go pull out the list, start
Right.
reading from the scroll.
Right. So when he says she's having a hard time getting into the holiday spirit, says she's become a homebody when she began working from home, among other things. So that may be some of it also. And there's some people that deal with seasonal depression, and maybe that could be some of what's going on also. With the holiday spirit, and as we get older and things change for us, and so I mean, there's definitely some truth in that.
Well,
Um,
and I don't mean to interrupt, but I just want to get this in there too. There's a lot of, you know, even Thanksgiving, holidays that mean a lot to us as kids. Unfortunately, as we get older, the people that meant the most to us just aren't here anymore. So that
right,
kind of takes a lot of the magic out of it for us as we get older too.
right.
Just in my opinion.
No, I think that's a great point. I think you kind of hit the nail on the head there, because you're right. As especially us as we get older. Now we're not old farts or anything, but you know, as we get older, there are fewer people around that we can spend time with.
Mhm.
So I'd be interested to know what some of the viewers do to kind of if you do get in that kind of funk, what do you do to get out of that? Because bringing this back around to Thanksgiving, this is really kind of when the holiday season starts for us. I always say that, Halloween is the beginning of the fattening season, because we run around, right? We run around, we like beg for candy, and we collect all this candy and just start gorging ourselves with it.
And you got to get your dad tax. You absolutely have to get your dad tax.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And then, we move from Halloween into Thanksgiving, where we gorge ourselves with pies and cakes and fattening foods and things like that, all the while being gluttons while we're thankful for being able to to have all this stuff.
I'm a glutton while I'm thankful for being able to be a glutton.
There you
Is
go.
what you're saying.
Then we move into Christmas season, because that's kind of what it is.
It
Holiday
is.
parties, whether it's work parties, home parties, things like that or whatever. You start eating foods that are bad for you. You have Christmas Day, and then comes the New Year's resolutions because you feel bad for being pigs the last 2.5 months. And then what do? We jump right into Valentine's Day, where we start cramming our faces with chocolates and things like that, and like New Year's
Well,
resolutions are gone at that point.
well, here's a point that I think really, really drives home too when you talk about, how come the holiday just doesn't feel as magical as it did before. I think a lot of it really has to do with, especially me speaking as a kid, there's a certain level of depression that comes into play when you take all your decorations down, knowing that it's over. That's the finality of it.
Yeah.
And as you get older, you look forward to that magic and you don't want to let it go. So I think that's why people keep their stuff up to February, March. No, not me. It's the latest it's ever been up is the middle of January.
Yeah. So are you a Day of Epiphany guy?
I am, always have been.
Yeah. Yeah. Not me. I'm not even going to put a tree up. I mean, my roommate's got a tree up, but for me, I haven't put a tree up in years.
Yeah, maybe that's your problem.
That could be my problem. I don't see the bright twinkling lights.
Get you a Charlie Brown tree.
Dude, you can totally buy those.
I know. I have one upstairs somewhere.
So when he says that she was invited to a friend's for Thanksgiving dinner and had to force herself to go,
It happens.
yeah, I can really. And you know what? Sometimes that's what we need. Like sometimes we just need to force ourselves
Yep.
to do things, because change comes from within us, and when we do that, you never know, maybe come the next year you've got something to be thankful for, or something more to be thankful for, whether it's more closer knit with your friends or newer friends or something like that.
Right.
So good for you, Wendy, on doing that. That's awesome. I hope you had a great time at your Thanksgiving. So all right, yeah. So, with Thanksgiving, it's one of the holidays, and coming up next, we have a holiday on Tuesday that's not really a great holiday. It's more of a day of remembrance.
Mhm.
And Tuesday, as most of you know, is December 7th, which December 7th, 1941, marks the day of the attack on Pearl Harbor by the Japanese military. And President Roosevelt described it in his address to the nation as a day that will live in infamy, and it's absolutely the truth, because it's one of the few times that this country has ever been attacked, by surprise. And we as civilians, we didn't see it coming, and it was really something that the U.S. had tried their best to stay out of World War II for 2 years, and it's just, man, it's just one of those days that you have to look back on and just kind of think about. And Mac, you're more of the history buff than I am. What are your thoughts on this? Maybe just give us a little bit of history on that day.
Well, what we're taught in school again is kind of the tip of the iceberg. Just the glossing over of a few things. I've come to, not to be conspiratorial or anything, because this isn't that show. That's next week. Um, they saw many Japanese mini subs in the harbor at
Mhm.
different times, and one was actually seen by the USS Ward, I believe it was. Pretty close in from the ocean, and they were told by their superiors to stand down. I mean, they had depth charges loaded up and everything. So that there really kind of transposes into the whole idea of you know the wartime economy, coming out of the Great Depression. Did they maybe not go after this, but maybe did they not stop it to improve the economy? Because everybody knows war's good for the economy.
Yeah, war makes money.
So, I mean, jobs were had, guys are off fighting the war. The country really sped out of the depression they were in. Even even as far out as 1937, 38. I mean, they were still feeling the effects of it then. So it really makes you wonder. I'm not here to say, yes, this is it. Yes, this is not. But it really kind of stops and gives you pause to wonder. Um, it's a theory. It's something to think about.
Hmm.
We all know how governments are secretive. The messages were sent up to the higher ranks in Washington,
Yeah.
and they just kind of either ignored them or just kind of brushed it off, one of the two. But I mean, that emboldened the Japanese to attack because they knew they weren't going to do anything.
Right. It's interesting that you say that, because there were a lot of people from the mindset that President Roosevelt did know that this was going to happen, that he wasn't caught off guard nearly as much as people would like to think that he was. And you're right. I mean, there were sightings of Japanese subs, and I mean, Japan had really been, for lack of a better term, just showing their ass for several years. I mean, even since 1937 and the invasion of China,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they just really they were pushing and pushing and pushing. And while the war may have officially started in 39 with Hitler's invasion of Poland,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of people didn't understand, or realize that it went back further than that, and that Japan actually, um, just they're the ones who started this, and it's like poking a sleeping giant. I mean, I think is how it was described.
It was.
When you attack a military base, Nancy asks Mac, out of curiosity, have you read anything written by Ed Offley?
I have not, but I will write that down and make a note to look into it.
Nancy, I'd be curious if you could maybe just put in the comments there a little bit about like, what does he write? Is it about um,
The
is
more
it
in
about
depth.
World War II? Yeah,
Right.
what does it go into in that? Uh, Fabian says that I guess he's read it. But anyway, back into the whole getting into the war and World War II and that. it's I've always been interested to know like all these other countries, France, England, and just how they, with the whole, with Hitler, doing what he was doing, and Japan doing what they were doing, just how. I guess one of my biggest questions has always been how did Hitler, get to um, the point in power where he was at, you
That's
know?
that's it's a fairly simple answer, and it just has to go back to appeasement because you have to remember, not 20 years ago, Europe just got out of a major war. That was supposed to be the war to end all wars. So there was a lot of fatigue. There was a lot of, maybe if we just
20 years prior, you mean?
right,
With World War
right,
One. Okay.
20
Yeah.
years before,
Yeah.
there was a lot of, like I said, fatigue. Maybe if we just let him do this, he'll stop. It was just a lot of justification for him to be able to take back, German territories, was where he
Mhm.
started. With the Rhineland and the Sudetenland and things like that, to where he called these German ancestral lands, to where England, France, places like that were just fatigued. I mean, they didn't have the stomach for it. So that, I mean, that's really what happens, and it just goes to show, and this cliche is just worn out. Those that don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it. And I think that's a great example of what happens when you appease a dictator.
So, what about the? So here's a question. Obviously we know that, when you know Hitler was doing what he was doing when he was, invading these countries and basically enslaving the Jewish people. Which, by the way, there's. I'm going to say this and then just kind of, I think maybe move on from it. I hope I can move on from it anyway. There's actually a camp of people out there. They're called Holocaust deniers, and it's like if you're one of those people, I think you really need to stop and do a little more digging into history and that whole war because, I mean, I personally, back in the day, I mean, had met, a couple Jewish men who still had the tattoos on their arms from the encampments that they were in and that. So I just want to say, if you're one of those people that think that, really go back and read your history and just like wake up, I guess would probably be the best way. If you want to talk about a woke community, wake up, on things like that. But anyway, I mean, how did he get to the point where he was, mistreating people like this and he was, literally killing people? And, how was this okay with the world, the global community back then? And how does that happen? Like, what are your thoughts on it? How does that happen?
Number one, you can't view it in the prism of a global community because it wasn't. Not in the sense of what you think of today. You know, the world has gotten smaller based upon the technology now. The world
Yeah.
was still eons. I'm going to go. People can say, "Well, I'm going to fly to France." You didn't even think that was a possibility back in the 1930s, let alone the 1940s. I mean, these soldiers were sent over to Europe on ships. I mean, you have to put it into the right context. I mean, it wasn't a global community, so a lot of what we heard here was stuff that was filtered down through intelligence reports, things like that. And
Yeah.
back then, intelligence wasn't really a science. Not to say that it is now, but it's more of a science now than it was then. With the drones, satellites, all that stuff. But
So let me ask you a question. Do you think that the U.S. government at the time did not know that this was going on with the concentration camps and things like that? And if so, why would we not do anything about that for 2 years?
here's what I could say to that. Um, did we? I don't know. I haven't come across anything that I've seen. I can always look deeper into it, but everything I've seen states that they may or may not have. Again, Why don't you intercede on that? Number one, it's a sovereign country. Number two, again, you have to remember the mindset of America back in 39 to 41. They were completely isolationist. They did not want another war by any means necessary.
Right.
So you really have to think of the the political mindset to maybe sweep it under the rug, because you have to remember politicians still run for office and they still want to get elected. So
Right.
you really have to take the the finger in the air pulse of what the country wants. It's not really that way anymore, but it was then. So,
Yeah,
that's just my opinion on it.
Yeah, no, I mean, and I think your opinion's kind of, right there, because there were a lot of Americans at the time that felt there was actually, no mandate for us going to war, and you read, you read polls about, people did not, want to, again, take our sons and daughters, into another world war or whatever. And it was, so no, I think you're right on that. For me, even in today's day and age, I mean, there are a lot of things that we don't talk about the mistreatment of, people with, China and their human rights. We don't step into that, and I mean, they've got some of the worst human rights policies across the globe. And, there are still actively like slave owners and slaves in the South African country, and, and in other countries also. And yet even, today we kind of turn a blind eye because we want to pretend that a lot of that doesn't go on.
Right.
And, I guess I'm amazed by the fact that a man like, Hitler was able to rise to power the way that he did, and just get away with a lot of the stuff, that he got away with.
I will say the reason he did, you have to go back, read the history of the German. Number one, the Germans are very proud people. They had just been raked across the coals in World War I. And this is a guy who promised prosperity, who promised to build back up the motherland, so there was a lot of fanaticism based upon his the way he delivered speech, the promises he made that actually some he did follow through on.
Make Germany great again.
Right. Well, for lack of a better motto, sure. But in saying that, he was able to whip up the nationalism aspect of a people that had just been denigrated throughout World War I and were viewed as the scourge of Europe.
So it's kind of I see what you're saying. It's kind of a, rah, rah, rah kind of thing. And,
right.
The people are on my side. And then all of a sudden, there were some people that, weren't. And it's interesting that you say that because, with Germany being the redheaded stepchild, so to speak, then they turn around and, the Jewish people, the way that they treated them, and, the rise of the whole Aryan nation and, things along those lines. Now, do you see any parallels with the way he behaved back then and the way that some people feel that, President Trump acted during his presidency, and the way that, some people now think President Biden is behaving? Do you see any kind of parallels with that?
I do. I do, and I prefer just to leave it at that, because getting onto that's totally getting off the topic. But I do see some parallels, and I guess I can understand how either side would draw those.
Yeah. Okay. I was just interested, curious about that. I can see on both sides, where there would be some parallels in that. And the reason I asked that, and the reason that, I'm kind of taking the conversation in that direction is, the whole thing with history repeating itself. Do we learn? It's like, we do see other countries right now that, as a matter of fact, I saw something earlier where I want to say it may have been Austria, could have been Australia. I'm not 100%
and
sure.
Now Germany. I know what you're talking about, how they're going to sequester the unvaccinated.
Right.
And they're going to start fining them. And if they still don't do it, they're going to throw them in jail.
Yeah. I mean, so there's that, but there's also
there's a little bit of a parallel there.
Some of the images that I saw, I mean, were like fences in between the vaccinated and the unvaccinated, and
they're throwing unvaccinated people into camps in Australia.
Yeah, so That's one of the reasons I ask. And, while that doesn't have directly to do, with Pearl Harbor, I think the whole situation, kind of like I would hate to see us thrown into another, war, whether it be civil or global, to where we're looking at people as less of a person than they actually are because of a decision that they, pardon me, because of a decision that they may or may not choose to, vaccinated or unvaccinated. So, and that's why, I bring in, President Biden, and I bring in, President Trump, because obviously, you've got everyone screaming from every side, that both of them are terrible, evil people. And, I'm interested to know where the mindset comes from, where you get to a point, and this, goes to speak for the German, the German community back in, the late 30s, early 40s, you know, the German community about, all of this lining up and thinking it's okay to do this. And, do we not learn from history?
And I see where you're going with that. A lot of people, if just to keep it on that time frame, a lot of people were, again, you beat someone down to their core, and you get someone who they feel and tells them is going to be their champion. You start having that little bit of hope, and that hope builds up, and then you get a nationalist sense of country, and it's a snowball that just rolls down the hill and gains momentum.
Yeah. All right, I got you. So,
but to go back on Pearl Harbor for a minute, you had all the things leading into it. I mean, now let's look at the harbor nowadays. There's still the shell of the USS Arizona that lays at the bottom of the harbor.
yeah,
There are still oil specks that still come up 80 years later to the surface. There aren't very many Pearl Harbor vets left. As a matter of fact, I think I read worldwide there's less than 100, and that was 2 years ago. So I mean,
100 what?
100 survivors left
Drivers.
from Pearl Harbor, and that, like I said, 2 years ago, and you figure their age and excuse me, a pandemic. Let's just say it's cut in half by now. So that lineage is really starting to dwindle. Now, a positive thing, and I think it's great that they do, every Pearl Harbor veteran that dies gets flown back to Hawaii, and their ashes get dumped back with their shipmates. So I think that's fantastic, and I think that's great.
That is pretty cool. Yeah, what's that one? Honor flights? Is that what they're called, or is that something different?
Honor flights are the ones where they fly veterans to Washington D.C. to visit, the World War II Memorial, Vietnam Memorial things like that. But I think it's an aspect of an honor flight where these souls get to rest back with their shipmates that they were able to escape from, and the others did.
Now, how would you feel about that if you were let's say you were a veteran of Operation Desert Storm, okay, or the Afghanistan War? How would you feel about that if you passed and your ashes were flown to Afghanistan, or I know you're not wartime military.
No, I think that's different in the aspect of it happened on homeland as opposed to overseas.
Gotcha.
I mean, realistically, any vet that dies, I don't see them wanting to be buried over at with their former fallen brothers over in Normandy, France, or places like that. I think since it happened here on American soil, that really stokes the difference.
Yeah. Now, France has an American military cemetery, correct?
They do. It is right off the hills of Normandy where the D-Day invasion took place. There is an American section of the cemetery there.
Gotcha.
See, that's what happens when I pay attention in history.
History is definitely more your thing than mine. I mean, here's the thing: I enjoy history, but I didn't pay much attention to it in high school, and a lot of it I learned after school. And the interesting thing about that is that what I did learn in high school is not what I learned after high school. And what I did learn in grade school is not what I learned, as an adult. Even going back to the whole Thanksgiving thing and the Columbus Day thing, and I mean, So it's interesting because when there were a lot of people. So I lived in Seattle, and there were a lot of people that were talking about the Columbus Day. Maybe it should be Indigenous Peoples Day, and I know there's some people who celebrate that, and and it's interesting because when you read history, Columbus was kind of a scumbag. I mean, and I think that that's the way it is with a lot of our historical heroes. Um, on a couple different levels. I mean, there are some that were actual heroes, and then there were some that were heroic but were not good people. Throughout. What are your thoughts on? Um, I'm not going to say whitewashing history because that's not what's happening. What's happening, if anything, is you see this across the country. We're actually seeing people losing their hero status and things like that. It's all part of cancel culture, I think. What are your thoughts on that on the holidays that we celebrate that are based on the heroic acts of people who are not really heroic people?
I think a lot of these holidays were created, and I say created purposely, out of a recognition for what they did in finding America, so to speak, which we know
Mhm.
Columbus didn't. He ended up a lot further south.
Yeah.
But I think that's where it stopped. They just look at the correlation to it and stop with the background. Nobody ever looked into the background when doing this. Now, the second part of your question, what I will say is, and I say this to everybody, these were horrible people. Who wasn't back then? Like they just took a statue of Thomas Jefferson down in New York.
Mhm.
I mean, this guy basically wrote the Declaration of Independence. Did he do things that we view now as immoral? Sure. Were they immoral then? No. So, I mean, I really put things in perspective where a lot of people don't. They just jump on the cancel bandwagon and just go with that. They don't look at the entire story and the time period. You could say, well, it doesn't matter. Well, it does. Again, that's just my opinion. The time period matters because you have to put everything into its proper context.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, I mean that makes sense, to kind of view it that way because you're right. I mean, moral, what's what I'm looking for? Moral standards were definitely
right.
Yeah.
Their viewpoints and everything were definitely time period sensitive there.
Yeah. So when it comes back, if we go back to Pearl Harbor, was there anything in particular that you feel that you wanted to talk about, or anything in particular that maybe while you were doing some research, just kind of or that you've learned, just kind of struck you on a personal level, or anything that just kind of that you would like to talk to our viewers about?
One of the things that I found out growing up, and I just didn't find this out, I found it out long ago, was my grandfather was stationed in Pearl Harbor in 1943 as a Seabee to help rebuild it. So he still saw a lot of the bombed out shells,
The destruction in that.
Right. So he helped try to rebuild some of that. So, but he was a Seabee, which if people don't know, it's a naval job to where you're basically construction.
Yeah, construction workers. Yeah, rebuilding and that. So, did your grandpa ever share any of that, those experiences or feelings with you, or anything like that?
Nope. And I think I was too young to really ask, but he never really talked about it.
Yeah.
Like a lot of vets of that day don't.
Right. I think there are a lot of vets that just don't share those stories in general because my dad was a Vietnam veteran, and he was in the Navy, and he was, I mean, he pretty much ran I think he called it the ship's tailor, but there was a whole lot that he did. But there are things that he would not talk about at all, and I actually learned quite a bit from my mom. Stories that he had shared with her, and it's just not it's not a good time for those guys to be over there, both mentally and physically, between, World War I, World War II, Korean War, it just was not a good time to, be a soldier, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
So, and speaking of that, just I know that not too long ago we had Veterans Day, and just want to give a quick shout out to all of our veterans and thank you for all of your service and just going to war for us, and just thank you for that from myself, and I'm sure Mac has that same sentiment about that, because we know it can't be easy, and so just wanted to kind of throw that out there. Nancy says that she has a relative who was on the Bataan Death March and is buried in the military cemetery in the Philippines.
It's a nice little piece of history there.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that, Nancy. We appreciate that. So, if you guys have any comments or anything like that, maybe is there something that maybe you learned growing up that you learned that was different after getting older, and just kind of how that affects you a little bit, or your thoughts on that, and maybe are you teaching your kids differently? Like, is there something that you're teaching your kids differently that you learned, and is it or is it a moral reason that you're teaching them different? Is it just to teach them differently to make sure that they have the truth, or are there things that maybe you have younger kids and you're protecting your kids from that, and you're reinforcing what's being taught in the schools, and we'd be interested in hearing that for sure. So while we're waiting on some of those comments, Mac, what do we got for next week's show?
Well, I believe this is the second Sunday of the month, so I think we'll have Nick joining us next week. We really love talking about the conspiracy stuff, kind of the, I don't know if you call it paranormal, but just the oddities, different theories, alternate theories, whatever you want to call it. And I believe we're going to touch on some of the Beatles conspiracies this upcoming Sunday.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about that.
So there is two that I know of right off the top of my head, and I can look into more to really share.
Paul is dead.
Many symbols that people point out that correlate with that. There's also the prophecy, the Lennon prophecy is what they call it, that John Lennon sold his soul to the devil for 20 years, right, which would have made it 1960 to 1980. The theory, it's an interesting theory, and hopefully I get my book before next week's show so I can refresh myself with it. I did order that book again.
You got to pay the devil his due, man.
Right. So that's what we're looking at next week. Got a little bit of research to do. I'll come up with another original random thought.
Random thought.
And are you going to have another commercial?
That's the hope. Maybe we'll have another commercial or another sponsor next week. By the way, just a quick reminder, for those of you who tuned in a little bit later, next Friday, Saturday, and Sunday afternoon, the Alfresco Productions will be having their Christmas in concert. Again, that's here in Granite City, Illinois, and you can see that it's a first come, first serve. It is a free concert, so no charge. They will be taking donations there, and it's kind of first come, first serve, general admission, 2041 Delmar Avenue here in Granite City. And again, that's going to be at 7 o'clock on Friday, December 10th, 7 o'clock on Saturday, December 11th, and 2 p.m., a matinee show on Sunday, the 12th. So if you want to get in the Christmas mood, you want to hear some great traditional shows, there's some great traditional songs, come see us all out there. It's going to be a good show. I've heard some of the performers. Some of them I haven't heard yet. But come on out there and, check it out. See Bonnie, see me, see my daughter. We're going to be all cleaned up and nice and singing some Christmas songs to you.
Well, nice anyway.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Well, and even that's debatable.
Right.
Because some,
Depends on who you ask.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, if that's it for the evening, no one has any comments. We made it through another hour. Appreciate you guys sticking around. And again, yes, next week we're looking forward to welcoming Nick Drago on the show. Mm-hmm. And I think with that, we may be out.
Have a great week.
Thanks, folks.